Hello marketer, it's Ty here with another episode of Lean Mean Marketing Teams. I'm delighted today to bring Stacey Danheiser. Stacey is CMO and founder of Shake Marketing Group, and she's also an author of her latest book called Standout Marketing, How to Differentiate Your Organization in a Sea of Sameness, that she co-authored with Simon Kelly and Paul Johnston. This book is fantastic. It talks about the sea of sameness that is happening in a number of industries. They looked at data centers, telcos, higher ed, and other industries, and looked at the problem where a lot of companies are just looking the same. They're not differentiating and they're not distinctive. So they did some deep research, scraping the websites and the Twitter profiles. They interviewed other leading CMOs from those industries, and they looked into the finding as to why this was happening and what companies can do about it to differentiate. And they came up with this value model. And it's about the competencies that CMOs and marketing teams can build to help their organizations stand out. And it has 5 elements of value. I'm not going to tell you what they are. You're going to have to tune into the episode to find out, but they are all extremely relevant, and it's a fantastic competency framework that I think you're going to learn a lot from and be able to apply to help your organization stand out. So please check out the episode and enjoy the show.
Welcome to Lean Mean Marketing Teams with Ty Hayes, where you'll hear from CMOs, authors and experts at the top of their game to learn how to create a modern, high-performance marketing team. If you enjoy this episode, please remember to hit subscribe so that you can be the first in line to hear each new episode as it drops. Now, let's get into the show.
Stacey Danheiser, author, founder, and CMO of Shake Marketing Group. Welcome to the Lean Mean Marketing Teams podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, as this show is all about how to design and lead high-performance teams, I'm really keen today to dig into your latest book that you co-authored called Standout Marketing and How to Differentiate Your Organization in a Sea of Sameness. But before we get into that book, can you perhaps start by giving us a brief summary of your career to date?
Yes, so I spent 14 years in corporate marketing. I worked in the consumer side for about 6 years. Then I switched over to B2B for the remainder of my corporate career. I worked in a variety of different industries, mostly Fortune 500 companies. And then I decided to go start my own consultancy about 7 years ago. So here I am.
Yeah, fantastic. And great background to give you context of working inside as a CMO and outside as an agency provider to CMOs. So I can see those observations coming through in the book. But to start with this latest book, what observations and frustrations kind of led you to writing this book?
Yes, so this was something that started probably about 3 or 4 years ago, where we started to notice, just looking at, let's take one industry. We did 3 different case studies in the book. We started with telecom industry. So looking at the websites and the Twitter feeds of these telecom companies, we were astonished to see that most of them were just kind of copy pasting what each other was saying. So we actually did a formal research project where we scraped the top 30 global telecom companies' websites and Twitter feeds. And we found that that was true. They were all telling the exact same story, the exact same why story. And we found, number one, that they were using very generic business terms. The top 10 words that were being featured over and over and over again were either related to business, very generic business, solutions, services, or telecom, network, security, cloud, just over and over. The second thing we found was that the story tended to be all about them. So there was an imbalance of the use of we do this and we do that in our network and our services versus you and what's in it for the customer. And then lastly, there was not a lot of proof points. There's big, lofty promises. For example, within telecom, it was all about digital transformation, promising to transform a business. And if you kind of click through to how that might happen, it was all about buy our services. And so taking a very big, lofty promise all the way down to a product and really nothing in between. And so there was a lack of proof points there. So that's what really started this whole journey. And we decided, well, is this a problem happening everywhere else? And so we decided to do a couple more case studies into higher education and then the data center industry as well. And, lo and behold, yes, it was also happening there. And so we decided to go talk to some marketing professionals across the globe, sales leaders, business leaders, to figure out, why this was happening.
Yeah, I found it really interesting coming from spending a fair amount of my career in higher education marketing and actually working at London Business School for a while. Definitely resonated when I was reading some of the thoughts in there around, how higher education institutions are all looking a bit the same, making big promises to transform lives and fulfill personal potential, where for many grads, that's a bit too lofty for where they are now. They might be more interested in their next career or actually getting qualified for a job. There's talking too much about themselves and the campus and the facilities in generic terms rather than digging into what actually may be differentiating about their people, and then all focusing on student life. So I was nodding as I was reading that. I think so much in higher ed marketing, it ends up being category marketing rather than true differentiation. And
Yes, yep. And that did definitely come through in some of our research as well, that higher ed has a two-pronged, like many organizations, kind of two different audiences to talk to, right? You have the parents who
yeah,
are making decisions, and then the student themselves, and they need to hear different things
yeah.
as to why they would choose that particular campus.
Yeah. And you've got alumni and donors and fundraisers and researchers and staff. It's such a complex audience, I think, which does make it difficult to be single-minded in your messaging. But your
Hmm.
other point around about us, I think, was telling as well. I think many companies see that as a place to trump their chest and say all the great things about us, and don't always put it in the terms of the customer. And it probably leaves the customer thinking, well, what about us? How does this
Yes.
relate to me, and how does this solve my problem? And I wonder if some companies would be better served by having an about you section, that talks about the customer and the pain points and how they solve them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the book goes into the importance of differentiation and distinctiveness. And I think these two terms are often confused. How do you describe these terms and why do they matter?
Yeah, so we think of differentiation as something that is meaningfully different about the core product, the sales approach, the customer service approach, even the marketing approach could be a main differentiator, but it's a business approach to the problem, and it's something that's really difficult for other organizations to copy. So in other words, it's not just what you're selling, but how you're selling it, and it's something that's ingrained in the culture. So like an example would be, at least here in the United States, let's say Southwest Airlines or Four Seasons hotels that have a fanatical eye towards support, and they go to the extreme to even hire people and make them take empathy tests to figure out if they're going to be a good fit for the culture. That's really difficult for other organizations to copy. So that's kind of at the differentiation level. Distinctiveness then is really more on the marketing level. So how are you grabbing customers' attention? How are you showing up in copy potentially, or in marketing tactics that becomes a memorable link? So your product itself might not actually have any differentiation. It might be exactly the same as everybody else's in your category, but the marketing approach then becomes kind of the distinctive feature, so that when people think of your category, you're the memorable brand that pops into their mind. Both of these really are important, but what we found is that it's really difficult to do. Differentiation is very hard, especially in commoditized markets. And so, as a marketer, it's kind of important to know which bucket you're actually trying to tackle. And marketers don't get to create differentiation. The company itself has to all sort of be marching toward that. So, we've talked to several marketing leaders, and they say that, look, if your leadership team is expecting marketing to find differentiators, like, there's obviously already a problem. Marketing's not creating that, really, it's just making the brand more distinctive.
So it has to come from the product or the culture or an inbuilt belief and something true that they can differentiate rather than just the messaging is at the heart of
Hmm.
that. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And related to this then, have companies lost their way when it comes to a clear value proposition, and where does that sit in line with this story?
Yes. So actually, we wrote another book before this one called Valuology that was all about how to create and define your value proposition. What we found is that, I think there's some stat that's over 80% of marketers actually don't even know how to define a value proposition nor how to build one. And so it becomes a challenge, because what's happening in marketing now is that people are saying, well, value proposition equals messaging. And that's really not the case at all. The value proposition is something that is the reason why the customer is buying. It's a promise that you're making to deliver value in the future. So the customer actually doesn't get to experience this so-called value until they actually purchase your product and put it into use. And that's a really important distinction for marketers to understand, that really you're selling on a promise, and that there's kind of the flip side of this is going back to make sure that you actually delivered on the promise. So yeah, I've seen just a lot of confusion about value proposition equals messaging. And going back to that conversation of differentiation is really a business problem, not just a marketing problem. And so I work with a lot of companies just to help sort of on the defining the value proposition. And I've just found that there's a lot of confusion around what that is. And typically, when you ask somebody what their value proposition is, they tend to go directly to it's our product, it's our service, it's the way that we do business. But what they're failing to do is then connect the dots to what that means for a customer. So the value proposition is supposed to be sort of meaningful for the customer and it fitting into their world. So a good value proposition would actually be saying our value proposition is that we help customers grow by 10%. We measure revenue year over year for these customers, and that's our value proposition, is that we can help you grow.
Finding that real value that you add and translating the customer value, not just the product feature, isn't it? Thinking
Yeah.
of back to Steve Jobs and how prior to him, many organizations were talking about storage and all these technical capabilities, and he came out with 1,000 songs in your pocket for the iPod, which got to the heart of the benefit or the value proposition for that particular product. So what were some of the findings then in terms of why these companies are all swimming in this sea of sameness?
Yes, so we called this whole problem the sea of sameness, because let's put ourselves in the customer's shoes, that if you're sitting here trying to make a decision and everybody is basically telling the same story, what ends up happening really quickly is that you're just overwhelmed by the amount of choices and nothing really looks meaningfully different. So you're going to choose either the one that was first, the one that's the cheapest, or just to basically get the decision done so that you can get it out of your mind. Or you might just be paralyzed and not make a decision at all. Even if that's in your best interest to move ahead, you might get stuck as to where you are. So what we found is that there was actually a competency problem. So we can go into how to do this, which again, how to create a value proposition. That was kind of the premise. Our first book, but this one was more about what can you as an individual marketing and sales professional, and what can you as a team leader and a business leader do to help develop the skill sets and the competencies on your team so that this problem does not happen. So we found that diving into a little bit more of that, why this was happening, first, and there was basically 6 reasons. I'll just go over them really quickly. But one was the comfort blanket of success. So after all, if you're already having success in what you're doing, the general attitude is, well, why should I change? And nobody thinks that they need to invest in marketing, for example, when things are going really well. And then boom, all of a sudden something like COVID happens and then everybody's rushing to invest in marketing. The second is risk aversion. So it's just so much safer and easier to copy what you see is working for the competitors. And so rather than trying something new and thinking outside of the box. The third is inexperienced execs. So people that don't have a lot of experience building companies tend to, again, look around the landscape and copy what's going on. The fourth is an inward looking team. So I work with a lot of companies that convince themselves that they really know what the customer is thinking and feeling without actually doing any real customer research. But it's interesting because how many people sitting around the table that are representing the product team, the marketing team, the sales team, even the executive team are actually the ideal customer profile? Chances are none of those fit that customer profile. And then the fifth is being locked in the organization's mindset. So we see this happen like within specific industries where people just jump from one job to another, to another, to another, but they stay within the same industry. And even you can look at job descriptions and requirements where one of the requirements is they need to have 5 years of experience in the industry. That's actually feeding the problem of sameness, because they're saying, oh, at my last company, I just did this. Let's take that sales deck and let's just put our logo on it and change some slides around and we can use the same thing. But the last reason, which I think was the most interesting and probably honest from the marketers, is laziness, just pure laziness. Good marketing is actually a lot of work and it's really hard to nail. And marketers know that. And I think there's a two-pronged sort of problem happening right now. It's that they have to not only develop killer marketing that will resonate with the customer, but they have to convince the entire internal organization of the value of marketing. So it becomes an exhausting, ongoing cycle. And so it's just easier to, see what your competitors are doing. Fine. That's, yeah. Oh, they're doing white papers. Great. We'll do white papers. Oh, they're doing webinars. Fine. We'll do webinars, rather than build up something and then try to go sell it into the entire organization.
Yeah. Yeah, so many of them, again, rang true reading that. I think I liked one of the quotes. I think it was Gary Hamel, something like, there's always a competitor in a garage designing a bullet with your name on it. So there's always a startup looking to disrupt your industry or coming at you. But
Yes.
when you're in that
Yep.
market leader position or you've had comfortable growth for a while, it's so easy to rest on your laurels and keep doing what you've always done to get you where you are without having to do something different to get you to where you're going. And the inward looking thing, I think, like you say, so many industries require that industry experience. So it just breeds this groupthink and navel gazing without the external opinions and diversity and other ideas that come in. And I think personally, when I've been in CMO roles, I've always looked to bring in outsiders. So I didn't want people from higher ed or from professional services or wherever I was working. It was bring me someone from FMCG or a totally different industry to give me some different perspectives. And again, I think that is an example in the book of a CMO that fired their agency that had deep expertise in their sector because they were bringing them same ideas, and they actually wanted someone with different experience to give them that outside in perspective, give them some different creative and different campaigns and strategies that were against the norm so they could actually stand out. What can companies do about it then? I think in your book you talk about the value framework as kind of the solution to the problem. Can you start perhaps by giving us a brief overview of this value framework, which has 5 elements?
Yes. Let's just real quick talk about alignment, because I think, that's sort of what can companies do to stop this problem is recognize it's not just a marketing problem or a sales problem, but there's an alignment problem. It's how is the product team tackling this, even customer service, the sales team, even in accounting. Actually, we saw in COVID, there was several examples of companies that leveraged the accounting team to come up with creative financing terms for their customers. And that could be a differentiator, so getting alignment there. So what we found, yes, was this value competency framework. And we define, a skill is something that you need, like what you need to do and what you need to learn to be successful in your job. A competency then is more about how you're doing your job. So it's applying the knowledge and the skills and the experience into being better at your job. So we found there was really 5 things. We laddered this up, and the acronym is value, because we believe that at the end of the day, the entire organization exists to provide value for customers, for suppliers, for employees, for partners, for the community. And so it's just a constant reminder that why are we in business? It's really to provide value. So the V stands for visionary. So this is having a view of what's going on in the market, what's going on in the competitor landscape, and where you want to take your company so that you can bring your customer along on that journey. The A is activator. We like to say that this is the act of getting all the troops marching in the same direction. So there is a execution piece, which marketers tend to be really great at, is project management and execution. But the other piece of that is getting everybody to come with you. So there's a big component of that is getting buy-in. The L is learner. So this is the dedication to learning new things and the time and the commitment to constantly being at the forefront and prioritizing learning. The U is useful. This is the ability to create content and programs that are relevant and practical and useful for the customer and for the sales team, kind of whoever the customer is in that situation. And then the E finally is evaluator. So this is the ability to assess whether or not something is working, being able to interpret the data and find sort of interesting things that you can apply, then going back all the way to kind of that V piece, right? It informs the visionary sort of cycle.
Yeah, fantastic. And yeah, they all make sense and can see how they kind of glue together. And I love to dig a little bit deeper into some of these. Maybe starting with visionary then. I know there was many kind of elements of visionary and what it takes. And yeah, one of the things in there was zooming. Can you talk to us about this importance of zooming in and zooming out?
Yeah, so we compare this to the analogy of an eagle who can soar at that 50,000 foot view and then zoom in on when they see a specific prey that they want to go after. And in the same way, it's marketers being able to understand the industry landscape and the big picture, but then being able to zoom in kind of all the way down at that customer level, and even the specific sort of buying scenarios and buying committees within each of those customers so that they create more relevant value messaging programs, content. One of the challenges I would say that we heard that in conversations as it relates to the visionary competency is people just don't have time to spend to be visionary. It's seen almost as a luxury to sit there and strategize. And companies are so impatient for action that a lot of marketers are just sort of skipping this step
Yeah.
altogether and kind of moving on to execution.
Yeah. Yeah, that's struck, especially for listed companies, looking at the quarterly results and even the short-termism and the rise of growth marketing over the past few years. It's been a lot of focus prior to COVID on lead gen and getting the acquisition and the short-term sales, and perhaps less over long-term. How are we building this brand over the next 3 to 5 years, or how are we helping this organization grow new revenue streams, develop new product lines, really taking that long-term view. Yeah, has
Hmm.
been a challenge. And then scenario planning. Don't think we could have predicted COVID-19 perhaps, but how important is scenario planning in this one, and almost imagining different scenarios and then adapting and iterating as you go?
Yeah, this is another one that let's say brainstorming or even working hand in hand with the sales team that's
Mm.
that's imagining kind of how these different campaigns, these different messaging, these different product lines, these different offers, how could it all play out? And and where did the puzzle pieces sort of all fit together and how do they fit together? This is a big one of it kind of hand in hand with that sense making, right? Which is connecting the dots. And what is happening right now is that most people are starting, let's say that there's like a layer of the onion, and marketers are responsible for kind of layer one of the onion. There's a lot of like 50,000-foot view content, awareness type content. Then there's a big gap between layer two, three, four, and then we get down to like the product level, which is layer five. So we go from layer one to layer five. And they're missing basically the ability to connect those dots kind of between
Yeah.
what's happening big picture to down at that specific level before their product is introduced.
Yeah. And I think as well, due to the pace of marketing, the need for speed and the sometimes a false assumption that activity equals productivity prevents us from doing that long range planning and even getting the whole team on the same page in terms of the threats. Some of the things I do with my clients is a simple steep analysis as part of setting a strategy and looking at the social, technological, economic, and environmental and political factors that are placing pressure on the industry, placing pressure on the organization, and then what effect that has on marketing. And I think even doing those exercises with a marketing team, the whole team together, can widen their view, give them that zoom out lens on what's happening, to then give them more context as to how what they're doing may help move the company forward to address some of those factors.
Hmm. And I'm sure that's an eye-opening exercise when you go through it.
Yeah, it is. It is all involved. And activator then, I like this because read in the book, it was making something or someone active and to put an individual on active duty. And obviously CMOs and marketing leaders can't do anything without activating their team, without activating stakeholders, without getting buy-in across the business, especially now in a world where delivering a seamless customer experience is so important. It relies on the CTO, CPO, and all these other departments. So what can a marketer do to up their game when it comes to activation?
Yeah, so I think the big one here, we talked about a little bit earlier, the underlying one of the principal competencies is the ability to get buy-in.
Yep.
And so what happens if you don't get buy-in is you become an order taker, right? So it's the opposite of that, to say if somebody comes to you and and this is a prevalent problem that we call kids against tanks, where
Mm.
it's executive team and people that are in higher authority positions coming to the marketing organization that may have less experience or maybe in more junior roles, and saying we need to go be at this trade show, we need to go sponsor this event, we need to go set up an entire campaign around this product, and the marketing team doesn't have sort of enough experience or knowledge to be able to push back, so they go just start executing. And so here it's about asking really good questions and listening. So I like to suggest to marketers to interview the product team, interview the sales team, spend time to understand what is it that they're trying to achieve. What does good look like? Are we all on the same page here? Because maybe my recommendation might not be that we have to go to the trade show. We can maybe accomplish what you're trying to achieve in a different way. And so to really sort of dive into that. And then I think there's definitely a collaboration here that is skilled at negotiating. So this is a skill that salespeople spend a lot of time on, right? And they're going to training to get negotiation skills, but marketers rarely go through negotiation training. But that is a principal skill here for being a good activator, is the ability to negotiate kind of back and forth on what does a win-win scenario look like for both of us, rather
Yeah.
than me being fully burnt out and working 24 hours a day to get something out the door
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
getting what you want. That's not a win-win.
Wow, there's been a lot covered in this interview so far. As a marketing leader, we know you like to spend more time taking action and less time taking notes. So, we've got you covered. We packaged up all the tips, strategies, and resources from each episode into some beautifully crafted notes just for you. Not ugly AI generated transcripts, but real notes taken by a real person on our team. To grab the notes, head on over to growthgenerators.io, look out for this podcast episode, and download the notes. But be quick, they're only live for a few weeks after the episode airs. Now, back to the show.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's so much of being a marketer is negotiating either with the board or the CFO or your boss to get, funding for your business case. You're negotiating with your staff to get their buy-in to work on certain projects, other stakeholders to work together. And like you say, it's not formally trained, and something that if you don't build as a competence, you can't be fully effective. And I remember another book was mentioned, Getting to Yes, which I read years ago and found really enlightening, discussing all options and putting all options on the table and kind of negotiating based on principle rather than position, and looking at outcomes rather than taking a really firm position, and navigating these different choices, where I think oftentimes as marketers, we go in with one solution or a fixed mindset, this is the outcome, and then don't allow this negotiation on principles or this exploration of a lot of ideas with the other party. And again, through the book, there was this importance of fully baked marketing material or something, where the marketers would go out into market or to sales with a complete written brochure without any sales input, and it was highly ineffective because
right.
it didn't have the customer intelligence or insight, and it was pressing the wrong buttons and wasn't effective.
Yes. And then what the marketers get frustrated because the sales team doesn't use it.
Yeah. Okay. So
Mhm.
then learner, obviously this is about acquiring knowledge, skills, or behavioral tendency. And yeah, I think this is so crucial in marketing. The industry changes so rapidly. And I think there's kind of two camps for marketing teams. There's a growth mindset team, and they're the ones on the kind of green curve going up to the sky. They constantly hire new roles, bring in new talent, look for diversity of mindset, continue to learn, build competence, do things differently, always experimenting. And they're the ones that continue to grow. And then there's the fixed mindset kind of teams that get a bit stuck in their ways, and they think what they've done will get them to where they're going, and perhaps more risk averse. They've been successful to date and maybe a little bit complacent, but yeah, I think there's two camps sometimes, and the growth mindset is just so important to be that learner.
Yeah, and I think and that one's interesting because it starts really with the leadership, right? And what's the mindset of the leadership, kind of implementing that throughout the organization.
Yeah.
And so people tend to sort of follow the lead there.
Yeah, definitely. But it also talked about the importance of the individual taking some responsibility as well, which I've seen.
Yeah.
I think if you're a marketeer and you're waiting for your manager to give you your development plan, then you may not be invested enough in your own career. So it's that balance of the leadership, believing in the importance of never stop learning and capability development, and putting in place time and frameworks and lunch and learns and things to do that. But it also takes some ownership on the individual's side. But again, in your book, you talked about the Ebbinghaus, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but the forgetting curve reveals that we forget 90% of what we've learned in a month, which I thought was interesting when we're bombarded with so much content, especially now through social media and podcasts and books. And yeah, there's so much that you can absorb, but I think putting it into action is so important.
Yes. Yeah, and that's one of the pitfalls we see to learner is number one, not spending time. So you ask marketers, their day is booked up with meetings and with going back to the activator side and all the list of tasks they have to do. So this is really number one, making time to learn and making it a priority. The interesting thing is that when we talk to a lot of marketing leaders and business leaders, one of the questions we asked was, well, do you have a formal budget to support learning activities on your team? And they all said, for the most part, yes, we do. But the interesting part was that I can count on one hand the number of people from my team that actually come and ask me to use that budget. So, that to me is a big opportunity. If they have a budget and they're not utilizing it, to take online classes and in-person seminars, or even hire a coach one-on-one to sort of train and teach some of this stuff. So that to me represents a big opportunity. The second one is just, I tell marketers, act like a journalist. So come in with a sense of curiosity. And I think a lot of times there is this expectation that marketers are scared to ask the question because they don't want to look uninformed or uneducated or inexperienced, versus approaching it such as a journalist or a child for that matter. They ask you all day long a million questions. Why this and why that and why this and why that? And by the time the kids get, I think, 12 or 13 years old, they stop asking questions. So we take that mindset into adulthood and into the workplace, where we don't want to look stupid in front of our peers, so therefore we stop asking questions. So I encourage marketers, and especially this is great if you're starting a new job, coming in and saying, I just want to do an interview style where you're actually prepared with some questions. It says, okay, how do we do this, and how do we make money, and why this, and help it sort of dive into that person's world and that person's role, so that you get a better understanding of how things are happening. And to always approach this, that, hey, I just want to ask some questions just from
Yeah.
a curiosity standpoint. You'll be surprised how many people are expected to know the answer, but when then one person asks a question, they're like, huh, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
I've never thought of it
Yeah.
before. So
Yep.
let me process through it. And then everybody's learning together. So
Yeah.
that's a great way to start,
Yeah.
is just, pretend like you're the journalist trying to uncover the story.
Yeah. I love that, and be vulnerable. And I think oftentimes as well, it's tapping into the talent in the team and sharing the knowledge. So again, I picked up that in the
Yes.
book, this importance of sharing what you learn with the forgetting curve. So if you go to a conference, or if you have knowledge, one thing I've tried to implement in the past is, if we've got experts on UX or CX or brand, get them to put together a presentation to the rest of the team, or bring in
Hmm.
outside experts for lunch and learn. And that, helps implement the knowledge of whatever you've learnt, and becoming the teacher helps you kind of become the master, even if you were the student before. So I was reviewing Make It Stick, which is a great book. I don't know if you've read that, but it's on how we kind of need to relearn as adults. And it just talks about the importance of learning is about comprehension and retention. And it just gives some good tips, like if you're reading a book, read the table of contents to get the big picture, then read the first chapter and then the last chapter, and then ask yourself, write down some questions, like, what questions do I have that I want to get answered in this book, and look for the basic rules and the fundamentals, and then go searching for those answers. And it also talked about the importance of retrieval practice. So I guess we've heard of flashcards and things like that, but with the forgetting curve as well, it was about doing it over time. So not
Hmm.
mass cramming and doing flashcards the night before your exam, but allowing sleep to kick in, which helps you organize your thoughts and memory, and doing it spaced out. And also that things that are hard to learn stick better. So knowing that if something's
Yes.
really hard to learn, you've got more chance of remembering it. So I thought that book was great for anyone needs to relearn how to learn.
Yeah.
So then on to usefulness. So this is differentiating in a way that's useful, relevant, or practical. Such an important topic. What can marketers do to make their company or their marketing be more useful?
This one actually kind of pulls together a few different competencies, right? Because it actually starts with the learner piece. In order to be useful, it is assuming that you know what the other person needs. And therefore, you have to spend time kind of understanding what's happening in the market, what's happening with our competitors, what's happening with our customers, what's happening with our company, so that you can put something together that's useful. And I guess the tip here I would say is, marketing has essentially two audiences all the time that they need to be mindful of. Number one is the external customer. And so, how much time are you spending to understand what would be valuable and useful in the customer's world? The second is internal. How much do you understand about how your company makes money? What product sets are the most important and priorities? What customer targets are the most impactful? Kind of that 80%, 80/20 rule of where the revenue is coming from. And really just spending time to basically understand both of those scenarios, and who you're presenting to at all times. And so in order to make something feel useful to the CEO or the CFO when you're going in to present budgets and plans, you have to know what they care about and tying it back to their goals and their targets, not going into excruciating detail about event plans or campaign plans.
Yeah.
So so there's really that piece. It's just starting. Fundamentally, the job of being useful is the ability to connect the dots.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we like to say, like, ask the question, so what? It's looking at something, and we can analyze copy all day long. I mean, we can pull something up right
Mm.
now and look at it. Okay, well, what does that mean? So what? What does that mean for a customer?
Yeah.
What do they
Yeah.
get out of it?
Yeah. And that was a thread running through the book, was this lack of customer understanding in terms of marketers actually spending face time with the customer to really understand their
Yeah.
pain points and how they solve customer problems, or even investing in customer research. Why do you think that
Mhm.
is? Marketers are busy people, but given we're meant to be the custodians of the customer and be customer centric and fully understand segments, personas and needs and motivations, demographics, psychographics, why does it get put off or not invested in compared to advertising or martech or these other things which allow us
Yeah.
to put messages in front of the customer? But if we don't know what the right message is or what the right pain point is, where it seems like we're putting the cart before the horse.
I have some hunches in my personal philosophy and experience, and I'll share that. First of all, I mentioned that I spent, several years in consumer marketing before switching to B2B. In consumer marketing, a large portion of your budget is customer research, focus groups, and spending money on collecting customer data and customer survey information. I mean, you just spend the money on that, and you can't imagine launching a multi-million-dollar campaign without first getting the customer viewpoint. Flip that to B2B, and the difference is that there is a sales team. So in a consumer world, your marketing is direct to the customer, right? You're closer. On the B2B side, it's marketing, then sales, then the customer. And so what tends to happen is there's a default of, well, let's just ask the sales team to represent that holistic customer. And the sales team, I always like to say, is take what they say with a grain of salt, because they're trying to sell something. They're interpreting things with the lens of, I want to just sell this thing as quick as possible. And so you're only getting a half of the picture if you're just talking to the sales team. That's problem number one. Number two is, when I was in corporate, I always requested to go to the sales training. So we would have sales methodology training, and they would organize this once a year. And every company I went to, I asked to go to the sales training and participate. And each time, the sales trainer, who was a professional, sales trainer, said, "Oh, somebody from marketing. That's interesting. I haven't had a marketer in here for 5-10 years."
Mm.
And even the sales team would look around and say, what's
What are you
marketing
doing
doing
here?
here?
Yeah.
Why are you here? And I said, well, because we want the same thing, you guys. We're both trying to understand the customer and sell to the customer. I'm just doing it in different tactics and in a more longer term, and you're doing it shorter term and face to face. And they were like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, so holistically, if we both play our part, like, we're more successful. And so because I went to the sales training and I spent the time to understand how sales does their job and what makes a good salesperson, I earned credibility with the sales team, so that when I said, can I come with you to customer meetings? Can I listen in on your calls? Can you invite me? They said yes, because they knew that we were on the same team. And they said, you ask really good questions. You might uncover something that we haven't really thought of before. Compare that to a lot of my peers, and they would always say, well, how come you're getting invited to the sales to go to customer meetings and I'm not? And I said, because they don't see you as a value add. They don't know what value you're going to bring to the conversation. And that's really scary to a salesperson who's trying to close a deal. And the marketer shows up and starts asking questions about, what did you think about the event that we planned? And did you like the catering selection?
Mm.
And
What do you think of this brochure that's had no sales input?
yes,
Yeah.
what do you think about this? Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you look at this email and tell me what you thought on the copy?
Yeah.
That's like the
Yeah.
alarming, right? For a
Yeah.
salesperson to invite.
Yeah.
So I think that's one. And there's a lot of advice out there that says, marketers, get in front of customers, get in front of customers. But I would say, marketers, gain the credibility to get in front of customers. You don't just show up to a customer meeting. I mean, every salesperson knows there's a lot of preparation that goes into having a really good discussion with the customer, and marketers, same thing. You can't just go show up in front of a customer. You actually have to do the legwork to come up with a strategy and a plan, and what information are you really trying to gather. So because a lot of marketers don't have the experience with the sales organization, then I would say in those cases, you should be outsourcing it. You should be outsourcing customer research and making sure that's a priority in your budget, to bring in a third party to interview your customers, do surveys with your customers, and then marketing looks like the hero because they're representing this in meetings. They come to the table and they say, I have new data and I have new insights, and I can tell you exactly what our customers are thinking and needing. And then they can bounce that off and they can form a holistic picture with the sales team providing input. But I've seen this happen just over and over, that all of a sudden the light bulb goes off and marketing earns a seat at the table because they come with this customer data.
Yeah. Adding value back to the salesperson, going, these are the pain points, these are the personas, this is what they're after. Richer detail than they probably know most of that, but certainly the research should uncover some new findings that they can use. Fantastic. And lastly then, if the evaluator is the last stage, can you talk to us about some of the challenges and issues that marketing and sales leaders face in this area and why they need to improve?
Yes. So I think the challenge here is we are all overloaded with data. There is no shortage of data, but the question becomes, what is meaningful to measure? What is it that we're really trying to achieve? And so for marketing organizations, this is, again, understanding the business and where the business wants to go. So it's really interesting. I mean, I talk with marketers and say, okay, well, what's the revenue target for this? I don't know. Well, how many customers are we trying to sell? How many new customers are we trying to bring on board? I don't know. So therein lies the challenge with the evaluator, is starting first with what is it that we're trying to measure. And so it's not about, look how many likes I got on the social media post or how much engagement I got. But you guys, we got 5 people to like our post, one of which was our hot target prospect. And now all of a sudden that represents an opportunity because we can see that this person's viewing it. They were obviously interested in it. Let's see if we can mine for some more data and start the dialogue. Versus looking at a lot of these vanity metrics that feel really good, right? It's that release of endorphins of, oh, people are seeing it and liking it. But the question becomes, well, is it the right people? And what are we trying to achieve? So that's my advice here, is just really understanding, like, what are we trying to achieve? What does good look like? And then spending time evaluating. I mean, let's take events as an example. In the marketing world, so much time is spent on pre-planning the event, and then the event happens, and then that's it. You move on to the next thing. And there's not a lot of time spent to recap what happened, evaluate what happened, make changes and observations so that we can get better for next time. So it's really baking that into the process and making sure that you have the right people there and the right data being collected. And that's just on the program level. On the customer level, again, let's go back to the definition of value proposition we talked about, which was, this is a promise of future value. And so evaluation here is, are we evaluating our customers and whether or not we actually delivered on this value? So one good example would be QBRs, quarterly business review meetings. So the sales team has these typically with the top customers. When asked what some of the questions are, though, it tends to, rarely does it ever go back to what the promise of value was. They're an opportunity. We're already meeting with the customer. And so marketing should be sort of helping to inform that agenda and saying, okay, we promised them we were going to help them grow their revenue. Let's make sure that we ask them, is their revenue actually growing as a result of implementing this thing? And sort of closing the loop there. And that's kind of the evaluation on the customer side.
Yeah. And then you can get those proof points, coming back to some of your comments at the beginning, that there's so many empty claims on websites where it's, we help you drive growth. But I guess close that loop if you are having that research with your customers and you're asking them those pointed questions. Did we create that value, and how much value was that? Then you can put that back into your messaging to, help attract new customers and differentiate. So.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, a lot covered there, Stacey. Just to recap on that model again, we had V for visionary, A for activator, L for learner, U for useful, E for evaluator. And we've talked about how to improve in some of those. Is there anything else as part of that framework, or in terms of building the culture that enables this to flourish, that you want to make before we go to our fast 5?
Yeah, I'll just say one more thing about that that we didn't address at the beginning, and what we wanted to be really mindful of for this book is that a lot of times if you're working in a culture that doesn't understand marketing, where you're constantly sort of fighting and you feel like you're just, executing on other people's ideas all day long. We wanted to really empower marketers at the individual level to say, okay, let me look at these five competencies. Which one can I go start to put some effort into developing? They may or may not be at the right company long term, but while they're there, let's pick one of these things and develop it. For marketing leaders, this is about looking holistically across the team, and do you have these five competencies represented somewhere on your team? We're not saying everybody has to be amazing at all five of these things, but certainly as a team, you should be able to look around and say, okay, we have people that are doing these elements so that holistically as a team, we're covered
Yeah.
and we're adding value.
Yeah. I love that. And I've done some competency mapping with clients and internally before, and I could see how this would be really useful to add to that and look at a team level and almost map where they are. And I think in your book, you've got, 1 to 5 and see how they map against those for different teams. And then you can see, what the gaps are at an individual team and department level, and then work out how you're going to upskill and develop in those different areas. So fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing about that book. Are you ready now to go into our Fast Five?
Sure.
So, what do you believe are 3 essential capabilities or criteria of a high performance marketing team? And I'm wondering if you may want to change this to 5 instead of 3 after this interview. But
Yes. Okay. Well, we covered the five. So what I'll,
yeah,
I'll answer this in a little bit different way, which
yeah,
is like, what should I tackle first? And I would say, number one is sort of that learning mindset, right? Having that learner. Number two would be reevaluating all the content and programs you're putting together and asking whether or not they're useful and what the purpose is for each of these. And then three would be the evaluator. This is something you already have the data. Go back and look what's working, what's not working. Those would be the three I would prioritize right now.
yeah. I've had I remember an interview with Malini Siataram from Bright. She said, yeah, through her experience, the first position she always appoints is that analyst, so that they can keep the team honest and really evaluate all the activities. So I thought that was a good strategy. And how would you describe your team's culture in one word?
Collaborative.
What is one metric you've successfully used or seen used to track and measure team performance?
The couple things. One, it's at the end of the day, marketing is all about creating opportunities, not just leads, not just filling the funnel, but qualified opportunities and facilitating conversations. So that's what I would say for marketing. And then the second piece is on a team level, just getting the team excited. Do they understand the big picture? Do they understand what we're trying to achieve, and getting them excited about their job, about their career, about where they're going in their path.
Yeah, love that. It's back to the vision piece. And
Yes.
what book or books have you read? I know we've mentioned some on the show today, but any others that you've found yourself recommending to others, or you think our audience may gain value from, apart from valueology and standout marketing, of course?
Yes. Okay. So I'll caveat this by saying I'm an avid reader. I read 50 books a year. I have probably 5 or 6 books that I'm reading all at once, all the time. But the one that I'm right now reading, it's called The 10X Rule. It's by Grant Cardone. I like it because it's super easy and fast to read, but the philosophy really applies to marketers because it's essentially saying you need to do 10x the amount of effort to get the goal that you want. So a lot of people give up after trying once or twice. Well, I sent an email, it didn't work. I sent 2 social media posts, it didn't work. No, you need to do 10x what your sort of original plan was in order to make it to that. And most people will give up, and so therefore you'll already be ahead because people will stop trying. So I thought that was
Yeah,
a good philosophy, and I like that.
I like that. It reminds me of Seth Godin's book, The Dip, as well, and how, there's this curve that goes up and then down and then up again. And yeah, a lot of people kind of stop at that first hill, or when they're in the dip thinking, oh, it's lost. But if they can get through that and get up it,
Yeah.
yeah, it's worth the effort. And so you've heard of Colonel Sanders and Einstein and the others. It had thousands of attempts to either get the recipe sold or the
Yeah.
light bulb done. So yeah, definitely
Right.
resonates there. Well, fantastic. Thank you again, Stacey, for making the time for this to share all those insights. I love the value framework. I think it's highly useful for marketers, chief marketing officers, as well as the team to become more effective and high performing. So thank you for coming on the show. Before we go, where's the best place to send people to either learn more about Shake Marketing Group, grab a copy of your book, or find more about you?
Yes. So first of all, I would love to connect on LinkedIn, Stacey Danheiser. My website is mktg.com, where there's a copy of our books and links to buy on Amazon and all the other book sites. And then lastly, I'm in the process of launching a brand new marketing community for current and aspiring marketing leaders to help up-level the profession. So trying to bring people together that really want to see marketing in the center stage and take the limelight. I think we're at this opportunity now where all of a sudden marketing is seen as more important in organizations. And so let's make that happen.
Sounds fantastic. I'm keen to look into that. And of course, all the links to all of that good stuff will be in the show notes. So please check that out. Well, once again, Stacey, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. It was a great conversation.
Thanks so much for listening to Lean Mean Marketing Teams with Ty Hayes. This podcast is brought to you by Growth Generators, a consulting firm that helps CMOs design and build modern marketing teams that drive growth. If you need help optimizing your marketing team, head to growthgenerators.io.